is A.N.A.L.O.G, the Atari-based podcast.
Sounds really Rube Goldberg, but the thing worked, and it produced a series of exhibits that visitors enjoyed, all controlled by the Atari.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Bruce Frumker is author of Memory Match, a memory game that was published by Atari Program Exchange. It was first available in the winter 1982-1983 APX catalog. As part of his job at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, Bruce created interactive Laserdisc-based exhibits that used Atari 8-bit computers. He wrote an article about that project, an Atari-based interactive laser videodisc system, which appeared in the March 1989 issue of A.N.A.L.O.G Computing magazine. Bruce was also co-founder of the Atari Computer Enthusiasts of Cleveland. This interview took place on September 15, 2016.
I worked at the Natural History Museum in Cleveland, and the astronomer, this is in the late 1970s, the astronomer had taken a public course on basic programming at the high school, and it involved punch card programming and was pretty rudimentary. But he was very excited by it, and I couldn't imagine myself talking to a machine or being able to program it. So he brought in and gave me his copy of the basic manual, and it changed my life. I discovered that I loved the way BASIC was structured. I loved the way it worked, and it made sense to me. So I became the typical computer nerd at the time. Every time I was in a shopping center, I would briefly stop by the stores like Radio Shack that had computers set up, and I would play with my rudimentary knowledge of BASIC. Mm-hmm. And the family took a trip to the Detroit area, and we went into a shopping center where I think it was a Sears that had an Atari set up by the washing machines. And I was lost because this was the BASIC of my dreams. The Atari BASIC made more sense to me. It was easier to manipulate, and the girls left me there, came back in an hour. I was still there playing with the Atari. Some weeks later, after thinking it over, I came downstairs and told my wife that I was going to buy a computer. And she said, "What on earth for?" And I answered honestly. I said, "I don't have the faintest idea." And I didn't at the time, but it came, an Atari 400 with a cassette player. And one thing led to another after that. I even wound up sort of returning the favor to the astronomer at the museum, because I wound up using the Atari and programming quite a number of exhibits that we had at the museum that were run by Atari. So that's how it all got started.
Oh, neat. Cool. Let's take a tangent. Tell me about the museum exhibits that used Ataris. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. The one that used it most heavily, well, I should say first, many of them were HyperCard because they could be developed quickly and put on the floor quickly. But the lure of interactivity was very strong in museums then. And the American Association of Museums was cautioning museums that interactive Laserdisc exhibits are prohibitively expensive. It could be $100,000 if you're not careful, with programming costs and exotic equipment. And the budget at the Cleveland Museum that I had for interactivity was a lot closer to zero. And so it occurred to me, let's see what I can do with an Atari. and started out with a Laserdisc player, and then had to learn how to get the Atari to talk to the Laserdisc player using an 850 interface. And the Laserdisc player used a really strange conglomeration of, you would communicate in hex pairs, but the hex pairs translated into ASCII characters. And that's how you could program it and tell it what to do. So I just, by working on it, developed how to get the Atari through an 850 interface to talk to the Laserdisc player.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's not a complete exhibit, because you need to be able to see the output of the Atari, and then it needs to switch to the output of the Laserdisc player. And video switchers were, again, expensive, and how do you control them? I found a $90 video switcher at Radio Shack, and devised a scheme whereby sending voltage out the joystick port to a relay, and the contacts of the relay would in essence press the fade button on the Radio Shack device to switch between the Laserdisc player and the computer.
Oh, neat.
So there was no roll when you switched the screen and all. But, you know, it sounds really Rube Goldberg, but the thing worked, and it produced a series of exhibits that visitors enjoyed. Joystick controlled, choosing which biome an animal lives in, and random selections from the video disc, all controlled by the Atari.
And your experience with using the Atari with the Laserdisc turned into an article in A.N.A.L.O.G magazine, right?
Yeah. In fact, the cover article, and it showed how to connect to the video switcher from Radio Shack, and gave all of the programming tips so that you could sit down and create an interactive Laserdisc exhibit, or if you were you could play with it at home, and however you wanted to control Laserdiscs.
Neat. Did you ever hear from anyone who did it in other museums or any application?
No, not from other museums. We got a lot of feedback one way or another from visitors, watching them and then interviewing them and watching people use it. And the system worked smoothly. It was a simple joystick to input into it, and people enjoyed it and learned from it, and it was great. So that's that's where that came from.
Nice. Oh yeah, I finally managed to find the issue, a video control system for your Atari. That is awesome. Cover article.
Yeah.
That must have been exciting.
Yeah. And when you look at the program for it, you'll see that it was approached sort of on a step-by-step, problem-by-problem basis. You know, how can you throw a relay to push the button on the video switcher? Well, there's a way of sending voltage out of the joystick port. And if you can send voltage out of there and put the right relay on it, you're set. So that problem was solved. And talking to the video disc player was really wild because of the strange way that they had of programming it. But actually, because things were a lot slower speed with the computers in those days, you sent all of the various programs that you might want to the Videodisc player, and then ahead of time. And then when it's actually operating, the user was actually just sending run program 3 or run program 6. They didn't see it that way. It was just, here's your guess for what this animal is and which biome. Does the muskox belong in a rainforest? That sort of thing.
Cool. Very nice. And you also did an article in Compute Magazine, which I gather, I saw a lot of references to this article. It seems like maybe you're the guy who popularized this technique of putting the Atari into the mode where it keeps hitting return and just inputs into memory whatever's on the screen.
Yep, and then you can save it so that you can make on-the-fly changes in the program and then have the program save itself.
Self-modifying code.
Yeah.
In BASIC. I saw this referenced as Bruce Frumker's mysterious Poke 842, 13.
To be absolutely fair with this, I learned the routine to do it from Atari. They knew how to do it all along. No one had asked them.
Really?
And there was a Watts line that you could call for technical help with Atari. And that's where I found this routine. And once I knew about it, the uses were, just compounded. So that I'm fascinated to hear that you were finding references to it. It's nice to know that these things are still out there somewhere.
Yeah, they are. Neat. So, yes, those are the only two articles that I could find, or unless there's others that you remember.
I got included in other articles in Creative Computing. They did an article comparing the 3 different graphics tablets. And I had written some programs to convert from one to the other and to move the images around. And so that software got included in Creative Computing.
Cool.
So basically, like right from the Laserdisc or the Atari hitting its own return key, these were all a response to some issue or some problem or something that I wanted to do. And one of the great things about the early days of BASIC is you could slog around and do it. And it took just perseverance, I would guess.
Yes, indeed. And you were a member of the Atari Computer Enthusiasts of Cleveland group?
Yeah. Joe Trem and I actually founded the group and were president at one time or another. In fact, the group met at the Natural History Museum in Cleveland for quite a while because we had Ataris and ways of showing it on the screen. So, that was a lot of fun. It was a very, it was an exciting time. People were discovering what they could do with computers. They were learning things and having a lot of fun besides. So I have a great fondness for those days.
So do many of us. Do you still have any of the... Did you guys make a newsletter? Do you have any issues of those newsletters anymore?
I'm probably do in the basement somewhere.
If you do, I would like to borrow them and scan them and add those to the archives online. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a box in the basement marked Atari. If there is, it'll be sooner. If it isn't, it may be very long before I can find these things.
Sure.
But that was the feature of those days, is that there was tremendous excitement and a lot of fun, and you were learning to do useful things too, and that was nice. So that's what we were up to.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about Memory Match.
Okay.
Where did the idea come from? How did you submit it to APX? Tell me the story.
Oh, the story is we, like everybody else, had an Atari 2600 game machine. And my youngest daughter really loved concentration. And so I went, and there's one store in town that had the concentration cartridge. So I went and played with it and thought it was dull. I didn't think it would challenge my daughter or hold her interests. And so I came home disappointed, but slowly thinking, I should be able to do better than that. And at the time, we had an Atari 400, remember, with the flat membrane keyboard, and started trying to see if I could create a concentration game. But as long as I was creating it, I would create one that could be either very easy for people just starting out with it, or something that could really challenge them. So I came up with the idea of having 4 different versions of it that you could play, one of which simply were letters of the alphabet. Another was little pictures. And by little pictures, these were pictures that were redefined character sets. So they were 8 by 8. And actually, one of the best times I can remember is sitting around with my wife and kids, where I would play around with each little 8 by 8 picture. Does that look like a house? Does that look like a dog? Does the dog look more like a house? And we slowly worked out the 21 pairs of pictures. So the letters were the easiest. The pictures were next easy. And then there were 2 really nasty options, one of which used the graphic symbols of the Atari, which, little half triangles or squares that some were filled in, some were not, a variety. It was challenging because they were variations on themselves. And so if the triangle is right-facing and you find a left-facing triangle, it could resonate as the same or different depending on how visually you were oriented. So for some people, that posed a really challenging option, and other people had no trouble with it at all. The 4th one were 3-letter words that either rhymed or sounded alike, such as sit, sat, hat, hot, or sun and S-U-N and S-O-N. And those were really nasty. People had a lot of trouble with it, but had a lot of fun playing it. So that with the 4 levels, you would find one to challenge you.
I tried the version with the little pictographs that you made this morning, and I thought that was a lot of fun. And it was just like, oh, that's an adorable little house. There's a crown. Oh, I could tell most of them was like, oh, those are really nice little graphics you put together. And there was a couple I was just like, yeah, I have no idea what that was supposed to be.
Yes, but we have to give credit to my wife and daughters for helping those pictures turn out. But if you want to give yourself a greater challenge, try the graphic symbols or the words. And what was interesting, because we would have friends who would come over and play it. Some could do the graphic symbol with no trouble and had a lot of trouble with the words, and vice versa. People using their memory and their brains differently, and it would show up on it, which I thought was great. So the game was not exactly a bestseller, but it did earn me enough to finally leave behind the Atari 400 and buy an Atari 800 and disk drive and printer, and I was able to go on from there.
Very nice. So when you submitted it to APX, did they have any changes they wanted or any suggestions?
Oh, yeah. APX was actually great to work with. I had a number of phone conversations with them, and either some letters back and forth where they had one or another kind of suggestion of something that needed speeding up or something that needed clarification. So they were great to work with. In the catalog, it says, designed to avoid distraction, this game isn't visually stunning. To be honest with it, it's not visually stunning, not just because of distraction, but because I didn't have much more skill at wild visual graphics.
That phrase, it sounds like they're changing a bug into a feature.
Yeah, exactly. But in fact, it's not distracting. You don't have fireworks going off. The cursor goes around and you select the things. But for concentration send up, people had fun with it, which is great.
Nice. Cool. So you made some money to upgrade to a Atari 800, and
yes,
yeah. Did you
and disk drive?
Ooh, fancy. Did you start writing any? I think this is the only thing you published through APX. Did you think about doing any others?
I guess the answer is no, because nothing comes to mind. As I say, we did a lot with the Atari at the museum just because we could afford to do it and I could program it. So for the continuing museum interactivity budgets of zero, we could work things out. And so I kept my hand in with Atari for quite a while. Finally, as from my gaffe earlier in our talk, moving on to Macs, and especially with HyperCard, which is so that was sort of the path at the museum. But we ran a number of exhibits on Atari.
Nice, love that. This is kind of apropos of nothing, but when I was a kid, I lived in Los Angeles, and sometimes we would go to the Museum of Science and Industry down there. And for a while, they had an exhibit. I don't remember what they were teaching us anymore, but the exhibit, it was like a whole little room set up like a deli or a restaurant or something, and the whole thing was Laserdisc driven. And I don't know if it was run on Ataris or whatever, but there was all these different stations, and there'd be like a waitress or a chef or something on the screen, and it was clearly Laserdisc driven. And I thought it was fun then because it was a neat technology, but now that you mention it, I cannot imagine what they spent on that, for all those Laserdiscs and computers.
And the Laserdisc was the way to do it, because you didn't have the speed capability in the computers for getting that kind of video signal on a screen. These were the early days of having quarter screen video, and being happy to be able to do that. So a Laserdisc was the way of getting high quality video out to the visitor that wouldn't be necessary today, because it can all come off the hard drive.
Right. Yeah.
But at the museum, we used Laserdiscs quite a bit until finally computers caught up to being able to put a really nice video signal on the same screen. And of course today you can do that on your wristwatch. So
right. What do you do today?
About 10 years ago I retired from the museum. So these days I'm acting like a retired person. I take classes, go on hikes, do all kinds of things, but read, listen to music, but haven't been doing any serious programming in quite a while. When computers moved away from giving options to the users to make an easy creation of their own. I guess you're starting to get back into it with apps, but it's different. There was more of a sense of adventure 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I'm up to is being a retired person.
Good. Excellent.
Every so often I go back to the museum and check to make sure the interactives are working.
Excellent. Make sure that Mac is not giving up the ghost yet. It's HyperCard.
No. And it better not, because I don't know what they'll do.
You mentioned something yesterday about a seminar with Chris Crawford.
Yeah. I think Joe Trem in the users group heard about it, and he and another person who I don't remember who, and I went to, I think, Chicago, and heard a one-day, or was it a two-day seminar conducted by Chris Crawford. And it was stupendous because, first of all, he was he was a rock star at that point in what he was doing, the software that he was releasing, and clearly a very serious thinker about not just computers and software and creating it, but how computers and humans interfaced with each other. And that there was always a sense in this seminar that you weren't just programming for being on the screen of the computer, but that it was that plus the human using it, and that was a unbreakable bond, a critical connection, that these aren't abstract, that human beings have to understand them and use them, and that has to be part of your design. And I was very impressed by that message and took it back home with me, and that was a feature of everything that we did at the museum that interfaced with the visitor. As we would create software, we would create exhibits that human beings could interact with, interface with, learn from, have fun from, provoke discussions with, but that the human was an absolutely essential part of that. And when you put something up on a screen for a visitor to use, he has to be able to understand it. He has to be able to find it. I've seen very high-end installations at museums where the buttons to choose are down at the bottom, but the explanation that the rollover provokes is up at the top of the screen. So if you watch, no visitor sees the explanation for the button that he wants to push. It's out of his field of vision. So at that level and at many other levels, that the human being is an important part of it. And Chris Crawford was, significant in making sure that point was that point got across.
Interesting. Nice. It sounds like it was well worth it to make that trip.
It was really great. It was great all around, except that here we were in Chicago, and the only restaurant that anyone wanted to go to was a hot dog place. So, other than that, it was a great trip.
Good. If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Interesting question. I don't know that I've thought about it that way. I would say, keep up the what would you call it? The archaeology, the digging of things. That this was an exciting era with some really wonderful products, and they shouldn't be totally forgotten because of the extraordinary graphic capability of modern machines. I still have a really wonderful memories of those early years with Atari, and to the community, I would say keep enjoying them, have fun, keep remembering.
Well, this is great. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for remembering Memory Match.
that was its job. Its job was to make you remember.
Oh, God, yes, okay. Boy, I missed that entirely. Okay, you're ready to move on to the harder versions.
Cool. Well, thank you. That's what I needed.
Okay.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.